Before you decide that your life is over, wait until you hear what happened after my flight was canceled. Because the greatest love I have ever known began on the day every plan I made fell apart. 8 hours earlier I believed I was finally closing the last painful chapter of my marriage. My suitcase rolled across the polished floor of Logan International Airport, while snow gathered beyond the enormous windows. The weather forecast had promised light flurries. Instead, the sky looked heavy enough to erase an entire city. I adjusted the strap of my leather bag and checked my boarding pass again, even though I already knew every detail. Boston to Chicago. One way. I was flying there to sell the house where I had spent 27 years building a life that no longer existed. The divorce had been finalized only 3 weeks earlier. Friends kept telling me that time would heal everything. They meant well, but empty houses and quiet mornings seemed to disagree. My phone vibrated just as I reached the security line. I expected another message from my real estate attorney confirming tomorrow's closing appointment. Instead, I saw a photograph posted by my former husband. He was smiling beside another woman. A diamond ring sparkled beneath the airport lights reflecting from my screen. The caption was painfully simple. Sometimes life gives you a second chance. I stared at those words longer than I should have before quietly locking my phone and slipping it back into my coat pocket. I refused to let strangers watch me fall apart in the middle of Terminal B. I took one slow breath, then another, and reminded myself that surviving heartbreak sometimes looked very ordinary. Sometimes it was nothing more dramatic than continuing to walk. I found an empty chair near my departure gate and wrapped both hands around a paper cup of coffee that had already grown cold. Around me, families laughed over vacation plans while business travelers hurried from one gate to another. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going except me. Then the first announcement echoed across the terminal. Severe winter weather had delayed multiple departures throughout the Northeast. A second announcement followed only minutes later. More delays. More uncertainty. The departure board gradually shifted from green to yellow until almost every flight flashed the same unfamiliar warning. Delayed. Snow began striking the tall glass windows in thick white waves. The storm had arrived much faster than anyone expected. An elderly couple struggled with an overloaded carry-on suitcase a few feet away from me. Before I could stand, another woman stepped forward with an easy smile and lifted the heavy bag onto the nearby seat as though kindness required no thought at all. She thanked the couple, accepted their grateful smiles with quiet humility, and turned to leave. At that exact moment, my wallet slipped unnoticed from my coat pocket onto the polished floor. "Excuse me," she called gently. I turned around just as she bent down, picked it up and walked toward me. She had warm hazel eyes, a navy wool coat dusted with melting snow, and the calm expression of someone who never hurried even when the whole world seemed to be running. "I think this belongs to you," she said. I accepted the wallet with grateful hands, unaware that within the next hour a canceled flight, one remaining hotel room, and the quiet stranger standing in front of me would begin changing my life in ways I could never have imagined. The woman placed my wallet gently into my hands before offering her own. "I am Evelyn," she said with a calm smile that somehow softened the tension surrounding us. "Claire," I answered. "Thank you. I do not usually lose things." She smiled. "Stress makes all of us forget where we place them." Before I could reply, another announcement echoed through the terminal. Every remaining flight to Chicago had been canceled until further notice because the storm was intensifying across the Midwest. A heavy silence spread through the waiting area before dozens of conversations erupted at once. Travelers rushed toward customer service counters, while others immediately searched for hotels on their phones. I joined the growing line with a quiet sigh, and a few moments later I noticed Evelyn standing several people behind me. Every few minutes our eyes met, and each time we exchanged the same small, understanding smile that strangers sometimes share when neither of them caused the problem, but both must endure it. Nearly an hour later, the airline representative apologized with visible exhaustion. The earliest available seat for me was the following evening if the weather improved. I accepted the new itinerary and stepped away from the counter, already searching for a nearby hotel. Every result disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. Fully booked. No vacancies. Sold out. Families stranded by the storm had reserved nearly every available room around the airport. Evelyn approached, holding her own phone with the same disappointed expression. "No luck?" she asked. I shook my head. "None." She smiled politely. "Me neither." We walked together toward the baggage claim area where airport employees directed travelers toward shuttle buses serving nearby hotels. The line stretched almost to the entrance doors. Snow continued falling outside in thick white sheets while icy wind pushed against the glass. I remembered an old travel rewards account from years of business trips and signed into it without expecting much. One reservation suddenly appeared on the screen. One room. One cancellation. Available for only a few minutes. I completed the reservation almost instinctively before someone else claimed it. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by guilt when I looked at Evelyn. She tucked her phone into her coat pocket and smiled anyway. "I am glad at least one of us found a place." She sounded genuinely happy for me. That simple kindness stayed with me. Around us, people were already preparing to spend the night inside the terminal. Children curled beneath blankets on airport chairs while adults searched for empty corners near charging stations. I looked at Evelyn again. She had helped the elderly couple. She had returned my wallet without hesitation. She had congratulated me even after learning she had nowhere to sleep. Something inside me quietly overruled every cautious instinct I had. "I have a room," I said slowly. "If you feel comfortable, you can share it." Surprise crossed her face before she answered. "Only if you are absolutely certain. I would never want you to feel pressured." Her response reassured me more than anything else could have. She cared about my comfort before her own. I smiled. "I think neither of us deserves to spend the night sleeping in an airport." She laughed softly. "That is difficult to argue with." We boarded the hotel shuttle together while snow covered the runway behind us. The city beyond the airport slowly disappeared beneath the storm, and neither of us realized that the unexpected journey had already begun. As the shuttle pulled away, my phone buzzed with another message from my former husband. I ignored it completely for the first time since our divorce, because somehow the quiet conversation beginning beside me felt far more important than the chapter one had finally left behind. The hotel shuttle crawled through the storm while freezing rain tapped softly against the windows. Streetlights blurred into long ribbons of gold beneath the falling snow, making the city feel distant and strangely peaceful. Neither Evelyn nor I spoke very much. We simply watched the weather erase familiar streets, while the warmth inside the shuttle slowly replaced the chill that had followed us from the airport. When we finally reached the hotel, the lobby looked more like a shelter than a place for travelers. Children slept beneath blankets across oversized chairs. Couples quietly shared sandwiches from vending machines. Airline crews stood in long lines beside stranded families hoping another room might somehow appear. The receptionist smiled with visible relief when she found my reservation. "You were lucky," she said while handing me 2 key cards. "That was our last available room." Evelyn glanced toward me with an amused smile. "You really did catch the final miracle of the day." I laughed softly. "Let us hope the miracle includes enough hot water." We rode the elevator to the 8th floor surrounded by tired silence. When I unlocked the door and pushed it open, we both stopped at exactly the same moment. The room was comfortable, clean, and warm, but there was only one queen-size bed waiting beside the window. No sofa. No second bed. No sleeper chair. Immediately looked toward Evelyn. I was expecting 2 beds. She smiled with surprising ease. Apparently the weather had different plans. I picked up the telephone and called the front desk anyway. The answer was exactly what I feared. Every room was occupied, and every portable bed had already been given to other stranded guests. I thanked the receptionist and slowly returned the receiver to its cradle. "Well," I sighed. "This just became more complicated." Evelyn rested her suitcase beside the closet before speaking. "We can make it simple." She pointed toward the small upholstered chair near the window. "I will sleep there." I shook my head immediately. "Absolutely not. You will wake up with a sore back." She smiled again. "Then we share the bed like reasonable adults. We stay on our own sides, we respect each other's space, and tomorrow this becomes nothing more than an unusual travel story." Her calm confidence dissolved the awkwardness almost instantly. "Agreed," I replied. We even laughed while creating for simple rules. Shoes stayed by the door. We changed clothes separately in the bathroom. Nobody apologized for needing extra blankets. Most importantly, honesty came before politeness if either of us felt uncomfortable. Somehow those ordinary rules made the room feel unexpectedly safe. While unpacking a few necessities, I searched my carry-on for a notebook where I usually wrote during difficult days. Instead, I found a neatly folded blue scarf that definitely did not belong to me. Almost at the same moment, Evelyn looked inside her own suitcase and laughed. "I think I accidentally packed your journal." We exchanged the misplaced belongings with amused smiles, realizing we must have mixed them while helping airport staff load luggage onto the shuttle. As Evelyn reached for her scarf, a large rolled drawing slipped from her bag and spread halfway across the carpet. She bent down quickly, but not before my eyes caught something familiar printed in the lower corner. It was a Chicago address. My Chicago address. The very house I was flying there to sell. My heartbeat slowed as questions filled my mind. Evelyn noticed where I was looking and quietly closed her eyes for a brief moment before meeting my gaze again. "Claire," she said gently, "there is something I should probably explain before you imagine the worst." For a long moment neither of us spoke. The only sound inside the room came from the steady hum of the heating system and the quiet whisper of snow brushing against the window. Evelyn carefully rolled the drawing back together before placing it on the desk instead of hiding it away. "I was hoping you would hear this from me before you discovered it by accident," she said softly. I folded my arms, not because I was angry, but because I suddenly felt uncertain. "Then tell me." She nodded. "I am an architect. My firm specializes in restoring historic homes and public buildings. A developer hired us to evaluate several older properties in Chicago." She paused before meeting my eyes again. "Your house was one of them." My stomach tightened. Every room inside that house still held memories I had not found the courage to unpack. "Are they planning to tear it down?" I asked quietly. Evelyn shook her head almost immediately. "That is exactly what I have been trying to prevent." Her answer caught me completely by surprise. She slowly unrolled the drawing again and pointed toward handwritten notes covering the margins. "These are my recommendations. Original hardwood floors restored. Front porch preserved. Library converted into a community reading room. Garden protected." I looked closer. Every page reflected care instead of profit. "You wanted to save it." She smiled with quiet relief. "From the moment I first walked through the front door." I pulled out a chair and sat beside the table while the storm continued painting white patterns across the night outside. "That house stopped feeling like home a long time ago," I admitted. "After the divorce I only saw empty rooms." Evelyn listened without interrupting. "Sometimes empty rooms are simply waiting for different memories," she replied. We ordered dinner from the hotel restaurant because neither of us wanted to face the weather again. While we waited, conversation slowly drifted away from architecture and toward the lives we rarely shared with strangers. I told her about 27 years of marriage that slowly became silence instead of partnership. I admitted I had ignored obvious signs because I believed loyalty meant staying even after love had quietly disappeared. Evelyn never judged me. She simply listened with the patience of someone who understood that healing rarely arrived through advice. Dinner arrived with warm soup, grilled sandwiches, and fresh bread. We carried our trays to the window and watched snow bury the empty parking lot beneath soft white layers. My grandmother used to say storms force people to notice what sunshine lets them ignore, Evelyn said. I smiled faintly. She sounds wise. Evelyn laughed gently. She usually was. After dinner I absent-mindedly twisted the wedding ring still resting on my finger. I had forgotten I was wearing it until that moment. My knuckle had swollen over the past several months, making the ring almost impossible to remove. Evelyn noticed my struggle but waited until I looked at her before speaking. "May I help?" she asked carefully. I nodded. She filled a small glass with cool water, added a little hand soap from the bathroom, and worked patiently without rushing or pulling too hard. Her hands were steady, respectful, and gentle. A few moments later the gold band finally slipped free into my palm. I stared at it without speaking while unexpected tears blurred my vision. I had signed divorce papers weeks earlier, yet somehow removing that simple ring felt like the true ending. Evelyn quietly handed me a folded tissue but said nothing else. She understood that some moments deserved silence more than comfort. When I finally looked back toward her, I noticed a silver chain resting around her neck with another ring hanging beside her heart. I realized then that I was not the only woman in that room still carrying the memory of someone she had once loved. My eyes remained on the silver ring hanging from Evelyn's necklace while she quietly wrapped both hands around her mug of tea. She noticed where I was looking and gently touched the chain with her fingertips before offering a small, understanding smile. Her name was Margaret, she said softly. We were together for almost 14 years. There was no hesitation in her voice, only quiet affection that had survived loss without becoming bitterness. I waited, sensing she would continue only if she wanted to. She passed away 5 years ago after a long illness, Evelyn whispered. For a long time I believed loving anyone again would somehow mean I was leaving her behind. I looked down at the wedding ring resting in my palm. I understand that more than I wish I did. She tilted her head slightly. Do you? I nodded. Not because someone died. Because I kept believing that letting go of my marriage would erase the woman I used to be. A gentle silence settled between us. Outside, the storm continued covering the city beneath another layer of white, while inside the room everything felt strangely still. Evelyn smiled with quiet warmth. I think memories become lighter when we stop carrying them alone. Those words stayed with me long after she finished speaking. We spent the next hour talking about ordinary things that somehow revealed extraordinary truths. She told me she restored old buildings because every cracked wall reminded her that beautiful things could survive impossible seasons. I admitted that editing books had taught me every story deserved another chapter, yet I had somehow forgotten to believe that about my own life. We laughed over childhood memories, favorite novels, terrible airport coffee, and the small habits that quietly shaped ordinary days. Without realizing it, the distance between two strangers slowly disappeared. Later that evening my phone vibrated once again. Another message from my former husband appeared across the screen asking whether I had confirmed the closing appointment for the house. I stared at the message before placing the phone face down on the nightstand without answering. Evelyn never asked what it said. She simply respected the silence. Somehow that simple act of trust meant more than endless questions ever could. The lights flickered unexpectedly before the room slipped into darkness. A moment later the emergency lights outside the hallway cast a soft amber glow beneath the door. The heating system stopped with a quiet click. Temporary power outage, Evelyn said calmly after checking the hotel information channel on her phone. She walked to the closet, found an extra blanket, and spread it across both of us as we sat beside the window watching snow fall through the dark night. The warmth of the blanket rested lightly across our shoulders while the cold glass reflected two women who had entered the day as strangers. I realized I no longer felt lonely. I simply felt understood. My thoughts drifted toward the old Chicago house waiting for my signature. Sometimes I wonder if selling it is really what I want, I admitted. Evelyn looked toward the snow before answering carefully. If nobody expected anything from you, would you still sell it? Her question settled deep inside me because I could not answer it immediately. For the first time, I realized I had been making decisions to escape pain instead of moving toward hope. Before either of us could say anything more, Evelyn reached into her bag and carefully unfolded another architectural sketch she had not shown me earlier. She placed it gently between us beneath the soft emergency light. It was not a demolition plan. It was a beautiful vision of my old house transformed into a welcoming community home filled with books, gardens, warm lights, and women quietly rebuilding their lives together. My heart caught somewhere between surprise and gratitude as I realized she had imagined a future for my home long before I had even imagined one for myself. Morning arrived beneath pale gray skies, but the storm had not finished rewriting our plans. I woke to the quiet sound of Evelyn speaking softly near the window. She ended the call just as I sat up, then looked toward me with an apologetic smile. Another cancellation, she said. My flight has been moved to tomorrow afternoon, if the weather finally clears. I reached for my own phone and found the exact same message waiting in my inbox. Instead of disappointment, an unexpected feeling settled over me. Relief. One more day. One more borrowed day neither of us had expected to share. We laughed at the strange coincidence before getting ready for breakfast downstairs. The hotel restaurant was filled with familiar faces from the previous evening. Children were drawing pictures on paper placemats while exhausted travelers had somehow become temporary neighbors. The storm had transformed strangers into a small community. Evelyn stirred cream into her coffee before looking at me thoughtfully. Do you ever wonder how many important moments happen only because something goes wrong? I smiled. Yesterday I would have said none. She raised an eyebrow. And today? I glanced around the room before answering honestly. Today I am not so sure. After breakfast we wandered through the enclosed walkway connecting the hotel to the airport. Flights remained delayed, shops were half empty, and the usual rush of travelers had been replaced by long stretches of quiet conversation. We stopped inside a small bookstore where Evelyn disappeared into the history section, while I browsed the novels. A few minutes later she handed me a beautifully illustrated book about restoring historic American homes. You should have this, she said. I laughed. You barely know me. She smiled warmly. Maybe. But I know you still see your house as the place where your marriage ended. I hope one day you see it as the place where your next chapter begins. I accepted the book with unexpected gratitude. We continued walking until we found large windows overlooking snow-covered runways. Airplanes remained perfectly still beneath layers of white, as though even machines understood they needed to pause. Evelyn carefully unfolded the architectural sketch again. This time she showed me details I had not noticed before. The former dining room had become a shared gathering space. The upstairs bedrooms were quiet guest rooms for women rebuilding their lives after divorce, grief, or unexpected change. The library overlooked the garden where community workshops would be held each spring. I never designed this because someone paid me, she admitted. I designed it because the house deserved another future. I looked at the drawing, then at her. You really believe this could happen? She nodded without hesitation. I believe people heal faster when they remember they are not healing alone. Her words settled deeply inside me. Almost without thinking, I reached across the table and placed my hand beside hers. Our fingers rested only inches apart. Neither of us rushed to close the distance. The silence between us felt gentle instead of uncertain. I realized I wanted to know what her hand felt like in mine, yet I also wanted whatever was growing between us to begin for the right reasons. Evelyn seemed to understand the same unspoken thought. She smiled softly and withdrew her hand only enough to fold the drawing closed. When this storm is over, she whispered, I want us to know that whatever happens next is a choice, not just an accident. I nodded because she had expressed exactly what I could not find words to say. At that precise moment my phone rang again. It was my former husband. I answered expecting another conversation about contracts and deadlines. Instead, he casually mentioned that the buyers planned to demolish the house within weeks to make room for luxury townhomes. My heart seemed to stop. I slowly lowered the phone while staring at the drawing lying between Evelyn and me. For the first time since the divorce, I knew with complete certainty that I could not let that happen. The words from my former husband echoed inside my mind long after the phone call ended. They planned to tear the house down within weeks. A place that had witnessed birthdays, quiet mornings, heartbreak, forgiveness, and nearly 3 decades of ordinary life would become another row of expensive townhomes. I stared through the airport windows where snow still covered the runways, but for the first time since leaving Boston I could see my future more clearly than the weather outside. Evelyn quietly folded the architectural drawing without saying a word. She never tried to tell me what decision to make. Somehow her silence gave me the courage to hear my own thoughts. I cannot let them destroy it, I whispered. She looked at me with gentle understanding. Then do not. It sounded almost impossibly simple. Yet I realized I had spent months believing I no longer had the right to choose anything for myself. We returned to the hotel in thoughtful silence. Back inside the room I called my real estate attorney and asked whether the closing documents could be postponed for 1 week. He sounded surprised but agreed after explaining that the buyers would not be pleased. For the first time in years, disappointing someone else no longer felt unbearable. When I ended the call, I noticed Evelyn watching me with quiet pride instead of celebration. She understood that small acts of courage deserved space to breathe. That evening the airline finally announced that several flights would resume the following morning. Relief spread throughout the hotel as stranded travelers hurried to reorganize their plans. My own relief felt strangely complicated. Every announcement bringing us closer to home also brought us closer to goodbye. We shared one final dinner in the hotel restaurant, lingering over bowls of soup that had long since cooled because conversation mattered more than food. We talked about favorite places we had visited, books that changed our lives, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. Neither of us mentioned what would happen after tomorrow because naming it would make it real. Later we returned to the room and packed our suitcases together. As I folded my sweater, I noticed Evelyn carefully slipping the architectural drawing back into its protective tube. "Will you keep working on projects like this?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "Probably not with my current firm." I looked up. "Why?" She smiled sadly. "Yesterday I submitted my resignation." I stared at her in disbelief. "Because of my house?" She slowly nodded. "Because I realized I no longer wanted to work for people who measured history only by property value." Emotion tightened my chest. "You gave up your position?" She shrugged gently. "Some decisions become easy once you know who you are." Before I could respond, her phone vibrated with a notification confirming her seat on an early morning flight. Mine arrived only seconds later. We were leaving on different flights less than an hour apart. The room suddenly felt much smaller than it had the night before. Neither of us tried to pretend this goodbye would be easy. As dawn slowly brightened the sky, we stood together outside the hotel entrance waiting for separate airport shuttles. Cold winter air surrounded us while melting snow dripped quietly from the roof above. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and unfolded the blue scarf I had accidentally packed on our first day. She gently wrapped it around my neck before stepping back. "Keep it until you no longer need a reminder that new beginnings are possible," she whispered. I smiled through tears that refused to stay hidden. Before climbing onto her shuttle, she lightly squeezed my hand for a single quiet moment. It was the first time our hands had truly met, and somehow that brief touch carried every unspoken feeling we had carefully protected. I watched the shuttle disappear into the pale morning light, believing I might never see her again, unaware that goodbye was only preparing both of us for a far more meaningful reunion. Chicago welcomed me beneath clear blue skies that felt almost impossible after 2 days of snow and uncertainty. The familiar streets looked exactly as I remembered, yet I no longer felt like the same woman who had left Boston carrying only heartbreak and unfinished questions. I drove straight to the old house where my real estate attorney was already waiting on the front porch with a folder full of closing papers. He greeted me warmly and handed me a pen. "Everything is ready whenever you are." I looked past him toward the weathered front door, the porch swing that had survived countless seasons, and the maple tree standing faithfully beside the sidewalk. Suddenly I could see something I had been blind to for months. I had never wanted to sell the house because I was ready. I had wanted to sell it because I believed running away would hurt less than remembering. I asked the attorney for a few minutes alone before making my decision. He nodded politely and waited in his car while I stepped inside. Dust floated gently through beams of afternoon sunlight, filling every room with quiet stillness instead of sadness. I walked slowly from room to room carrying Evelyn's architectural drawing beneath my arm. When I reached the dining room, I spread the sketch across the old wooden table and compared it with the rooms surrounding me. For the first time I imagined laughter replacing silence, books filling empty shelves, women gathering around shared meals, and strangers leaving as friends. The future no longer looked frightening. It looked welcoming. I stepped outside and handed the attorney the unsigned paperwork. "I am canceling the sale," I said calmly. He blinked in surprise before offering a respectful smile. "Then congratulations," he replied. "Sometimes keeping something is the bravest decision." Over the following months my entire life quietly changed. I resigned from my publishing position in Boston and moved permanently into the Chicago house. Volunteers from local preservation groups offered to help restore the property after hearing about the community project. Neighbors donated books, furniture, flowers, and countless hours of encouragement. The neglected garden slowly returned to life. The library became a peaceful reading room. The old dining room transformed into a welcoming gathering place where women rebuilding their lives after divorce, grief, or unexpected change shared stories over coffee and homemade meals. Every improvement reminded me of Evelyn's belief that beautiful things deserved another chance. I tried to find her many times, I called her former architecture firm only to learn she had resigned shortly after the storm. I searched professional organizations, restoration groups, and public directories, but every path ended with another polite apology. Weeks quietly became months. Sometimes I wondered whether our meeting had simply been one extraordinary gift that life never intended to repeat. Then one rainy afternoon I opened a preservation magazine while drinking tea beside the restored front window. Halfway through the issue my heart nearly stopped. A full-page article featured independent architects leading community restoration projects across the country. Standing beside a beautifully restored historic train station was Evelyn, smiling with the same calm kindness I remembered from the airport. The article explained that she had declined a prestigious international position to focus entirely on projects serving local communities. The bottom of the page was a brief announcement for an upcoming historic preservation conference in downtown Chicago only 2 weeks away. I gently folded the magazine, looked around the home that now carried hope instead of regret, and smiled to myself. For the first time since watching her shuttle disappear, I no longer felt like I was searching for someone I had lost. I felt like I was finally walking toward the life both of us had quietly begun building the moment a winter storm changed everything. 2 weeks later I stood outside the historic preservation conference with Evelyn's blue scarf folded carefully inside my coat pocket. The winter air was crisp, the sky brilliantly clear, and for the first time in many years I was walking toward something instead of away from it. The conference filled an old Chicago landmark that had once faced demolition before a determined group of architects restored it to life. Somehow that felt like the perfect place for unfinished stories to find their ending. I wandered through exhibits showcasing restored libraries, train stations, schools, and family homes until I reached a presentation surrounded by a quiet crowd. There she was. Evelyn stood beside a series of architectural drawings, explaining how preserving a building meant preserving the memories that gave it meaning. She looked almost exactly as she had the morning we said goodbye, except now there was a quiet confidence that came from someone living a life completely aligned with her heart. She turned toward another visitor, and then her eyes found mine. Everything else around us seemed to disappear. Surprise crossed her face first, followed almost instantly by the same gentle smile that had handed me my wallet in the airport months before. "Claire," she whispered, hardly believing it. I smiled through tears that arrived before I could stop them. "I finally found you." She laughed softly. I was beginning to think the universe wanted us to keep missing each other by a few minutes. We stepped outside onto a quiet terrace overlooking the Chicago skyline. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the blue scarf before placing it carefully into her hands. "You told me to keep it until I believed new beginnings were possible," I said. "I think it brought me exactly where I needed to be." Evelyn looked at the scarf for a long moment before gently wrapping it back around my neck instead. "No," she replied with a warm smile. "I think it belongs with you now." We talked for what felt like hours. I showed her photographs of the restored house, the reading room filled with donated books, the community dinners, the flower garden blooming where weeds once grew, and the women who now gathered every week to encourage one another through difficult seasons. Evelyn looked at every picture with quiet wonder. "You made the drawing real," she whispered. I shook my head. "We made it real. You gave me the courage to imagine it first." She looked down for a moment before taking a slow breath. "There is something I never told you." I waited quietly. After the storm I received an offer to lead an international restoration project in Europe. It was everything I had worked toward for years. She smiled gently. I turned it down because I realized I no longer wanted a career that kept taking me farther away from the life I actually wanted. My heart filled with quiet hope. "And what life is that?" She looked directly into my eyes. "One where I stop letting fear make my decisions." Without thinking I reached for her hand. This time neither of us hesitated. There was no storm forcing us together, no canceled flights, no shared hotel room, and no borrowed time. There were only two women who had chosen healing over fear and honesty over regret. Later that afternoon I invited Evelyn to visit the house. As we stepped through the front door together, sunlight streamed across the restored hardwood floors while gentle laughter drifted from the library where women shared coffee and conversation. Evelyn slowly turned in a quiet circle, taking in every detail that had once existed only inside her imagination. She smiled through grateful tears before resting her hand inside mine. "It finally feels like home," she whispered. I looked around the house, then back at the woman standing beside me. "So do I." As evening settled across the porch and golden light filtered through the old maple tree, I realized the greatest miracle had never been the canceled flight or the last available hotel room. The miracle was discovering that life sometimes delays the journey we planned only to guide us toward the one our hearts were always waiting to begin.